A very good morning. Hello, Professor Sibyl. How are you?
Hi, how are you? Good morning.
All good, all good. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chakravarti. Good morning, Mr. Sen.
Good morning. Good morning.
Dr. Diwan. Yeah, Dr. Diwan. Mr. Pratapa is also there. Thank you very much. In fact, we were just wanting to, we were just trying to finalize the book because there has been some last minute change where the former minister who had earlier confirmed to address us, the Lao Health Minister, has now, due to some health reasons, he is not able to join. However, I think we will go ahead with this industry focused sessions. I think we have very good 4 speakers. 2 from India and 2 based out of Myanmar and Malaysia, respectively. So, Mr. Chakravarti, I think maybe in a couple of minutes we'll be able to start. I hope it's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I was just checking the people who have logged in. We have now more than almost 100, around 200, close to 200 people who have logged in. Participants, and as we go along, I'm sure this will move further up.
And I think we have participants from across the globe, right?
Yeah, we have mostly from the ASEAN region and India. I think almost like 60% from India and around 40% from ASEAN region. From other parts also we have some, but that is not very significant. Yeah, apart from these 2 regions. And this being the first session of the day, of the second day. Yesterday we had a very good sessions with inauguration by Dr. Jaishankar, our Minister for External Affairs, and various other ministries and all were there. So that went off well. Today also, later in the day, we have Mr. Piyush Goyal joining. So another 2 minutes we'll be, I think we are, we have just been put on live. So now it is visible to all other participants. So we will, in another minute, we can start, if that is okay. So first of all, I will just do some, I'll just do some introduction and then we'll introduce Mr. Chakravarti, and then Mr. Chakravarti can take over, if that is okay.
Yeah, that is okay. So I'm going to introduce other speakers, right?
That's right. Yeah. So very good morning to one and all, and welcome to this session on evolving healthcare needs, new investment opportunities. This is the first session for day 2 of the Indo-ASEAN Business Summit, CII, jointly with the support of Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. Yesterday's sessions were quite enthralling, and we had an excellent participation across various countries in these 2 regions, that is ASEAN and India. And today again we have come together for this very important session, which is, if I would say, one of the most important topics in the current current scenario, where we have where we talk about in the wake of COVID pandemic, which is still hovering around, though in India we are seeing a tapering of the pandemic, but I am sure but we are still keeping our fingers crossed. But this is a sector where we see there is the most opportunities in terms of collaborations and opportunities for partnership. To take this session forward, we have Mr. Joy Chakraborty, who is the chairman of Healthcare Subcommittee of CII Western Region, and also the Chief Operating Officer of one of the leading Indian hospitals called the Hinduja Hospital, based out of Mumbai. And we would have 4 industry speakers who would be giving their perspective and a very good distribution. I would suggest we have two from the healthcare sector. One Dr. Sandeep Diwan, again, a director and HOD from the ECMO, the Fortis Memorial Research Institute, Dr. Diwan. We also have Dr. Anupam Sibal, the group medical director from Apollo Hospitals. These two, as you would be aware, are leading hospitals which have active presence in this region too. We also have two other very important part of the healthcare value chain, the pharmaceutical sector, which are again kind of based out of India, but giving their perspective from their regions. Mr. Satya Pratapa, who's the country head of Sun Pharmaceutical Myanmar, and Mr. Indranil Sen, Managing Director, Ranbaxy, Malaysia. So with these few introductory remarks, I would now invite Mr. Chakraborty to give his opening remarks and take forward the session. Over to Mr. Chakraborty.
Thank you, Mr. Rajesh, and good morning, good afternoon, depending upon wherever you are. And thanks for joining in this very important session on healthcare post-COVID world, organized by CII in this Indo-Asian Business Summit. So today, as very correctly Mr. Rajesh has told, this healthcare is going to be one of the most important game changer, or going to play an important role in terms of the overall business, overall industry, in development, in terms of progress. So today in this session, we are going to have deliberations, presentations by four distinguished panelists, and I'll come to each one of them and I'll request them. But before that, I must say that how this is going to play the important role, because this pandemic has inflicted enormous strain on the workforce, infrastructure, and supply chain of the healthcare sector. At the same time, the pandemic has also been accelerating change across the ecosystem and pushing public and private health system to adapt and innovate quickly. And we have seen many such innovations have come up into the surface during these last 1.5 years, or maybe a little more than that. And some of those are going to be shared here soon. And this has resulted in rising investment in healthcare technologies such as telemedicine and remote monitoring, as well as some of the tests and some of the diagnostics procedure which has come up in last 1.5 years. The World Health Organization estimates that Asians' average per capita healthcare expenditure at USD 5,400 plus US dollar, which makes up about 4% of the Asian nation's average GDP. So close to 4% of GDP, and ideally we look for around 5%. So we are close to that. And some of the countries which are exceptionally done well or spend more, like Brunei or Singapore, where the per capita expenses on healthcare is around 2,200 USD in Brunei, and in Singapore around 22,000, and in Brunei around 22,000, and Singapore around 14,400. So you can see there are skewed distribution of GDP expenses on health, and I'm sure that is going to improve across the other regions too. Investment in healthcare technologies in Southeast Asia have increased over the years, and it is likely to get a significant push in the future, driven primarily by the pandemic, and already we have seen some of the results. Some of the trends which are worth noticing are patients are more engaged with their care and expect the same convenience and transparency for healthcare services. There is a new desire to access and use the data. This big data is playing a huge role, and they're already created to provide transparency into product performance. Advanced analytics, automation, and the cloud are making it easier to increase productivity and improve the quality of decision making. Digitization has started to move beyond the digital pill to to improve outcomes and provide personalized medicine. And I'm happy to share with some of the international participants that in India already we have introduced National Digital Health Mission, and very recently the citizens are going to get the cards, which are digital card, where all their records and personal informations are going to be stored, so they can go across and avail treatment wherever they are. And digital ecosystem are playing an increasingly important role, and new non-traditional tech players are also intervening in this healthcare sector. Various issues and challenges such as scarcity of doctors and hospital beds have led to these trends, and for India and Asean, there is an opportunity for collaborative policy development through exchange of ideas and best practices across the two regions. India and the Asian nations can also focus on building an ecosystem through strategic partnership with healthcare providers, users, and intermediaries. With both India and ASEAN witnessing significant investment in healthcare technologies, private sector and startups, which are playing very important role today, collaborate and share best practices in several upcoming areas, including home healthcare, e-pharmacy, and fitness and wellness apps. With the success of this COVID app, and in India for such a huge population base, the COVID has worked tremendously. India can support other countries who may want to use COVID or design a similar digital vaccination management system. India's pharmaceutical industry can also become a key supplier of generic drugs, which is already happening, but it can go much beyond what we are doing today. Medical devices and vaccines to the Asian nations. With one of the largest vaccine producing capacity, expanding medical devices capabilities, and low cost generics production, India could be a strong trading and investment partner to Asian in this sector. Thus, it becomes pertinent to discuss and familiarize with the latest development to optimally and efficiently invest in science and technology to address future healthcare issues. I would like to now invite the esteemed speakers at the session to deliberate on the out-of-box ideas for collaboration in healthcare spaces, cooperation to arrest future epidemics, use of data sciences. And I'm sure this deliberation will be really helpful and meaningful for the people who are attending, and it can take our collaboration much forward. So with this, as already Rajesh has introduced the other panelists, I'll not take much time. I will get into the discussion, and the primary thing that the theme on which I'll be requesting all the speakers to speak is the evolving healthcare needs and the new health investment opportunities in sector. Some of them are going to have a presentation and some of them are going to give a talk on this. So first I will start with Dr. Anupam Shibal, with the one of the largest chain, not only in India, probably in the world. And he is a group medical director. And he has managed from the forefront this COVID pandemic. And there are a lot of learnings. And I think he can talk about the learnings, what he has, and from there, what are the opportunities have arisen and what are the new investment areas we can see. So with this, I request Dr. Sibal to begin with.
Good morning. It's a privilege to be a part of this panel. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'm so delighted that we have colleagues from across the region who are part of this amazing conference that's been organized. Who would have thought that 600 days down, we'd be discussing COVID? It's actually day 618 of the pandemic. And of course, there's been much devastation with 219 million cases in the world and 33 in India. But while we've had devastation, we've also seen what we've never seen before, the size and the scale at which we have progressed. I mean, from unraveling the genome in a matter of days to developing diagnostic kits in weeks to starting clinical trials for medication and for vaccination in a matter of weeks, having the trial data up in a few months and actually vaccinating within a course of a few months after the trial started. This is totally unprecedented. Normally take 5 to 10 years to develop a vaccine. So clearly, I think our progress in terms of being able to tackle the pandemic has been truly remarkable. While on one side we've been dealing with the pandemic, we've also had to deal with the infodemic. Just to give you a sense, if we go onto Google and type diabetes, you get 544 million results, and you type COVID-19, you get 4.2 billion results. So there is more information on COVID, which is 618 days old, than diabetes that we've known for 3,000 years. We saw that with Arogya Setu, the Government of India portal, which saw more than 50 million downloads in 2 weeks and became the most downloaded app in the world ever. We saw that with the Apollo COVID Risk Scanner, where we had 16 million downloads. So clearly, there is hunger for knowledge. People want information. And I think as time goes by, we're going to have to focus more and more about providing this information and providing it in a credible fashion. We've seen technology take root more than ever before. And while we've been talking about telemedicine, in fact, India's first and the world's first VSAT-enabled telemedicine program was established by Apollo more than 20 years ago when Mr. Clinton visited. But the traction that we saw in the last 1 year has been unprecedented. In fact, at Apollo 24/7, we've completed more than 1 million virtual consults. And there are numerous advantages to virtual consultation to patients. They don't have to travel. There's loss of wages when they travel, time, inconvenience, expense of staying in another city. And of course, for the medical professional, it's so much more beneficial to be able to confer with colleagues across different centers, different cities, have boards, and to be able to give an opinion, saving a lot of effort and time and energy, both for the patient and their families. So I think virtual consults are here to stay. And we've all discovered that we can manage a significant proportion of our work through virtual consults when we don't physically have to examine the patient. I think another example of technology being leveraged is the eICU concept, because India, or for that matter, the world, will never have enough intensive care specialists. So with eICUs, one intensivist can manage beds across several cities, and we've done that with our eICU program, managing ICU beds across 12 states. Digital pathology, again, in really complicated cases, to scan the slide and the specialist pathologist, and there are 13 specialties in pathology, can in his office comment on a biopsy for a rare condition. Telecardiology, we've deployed a tool, an artificial intelligence-based a cardiac scanner by looking at 500,000 records, and this we've done with Microsoft. And the use of AI, ML, I think will be seen more and more. Patients, or for that matter, healthy individuals, want service to be delivered at their doorstep, whether it's dietetic counseling, or whether it's medicines at home, or whether it's home collection of samples. So I think we're going to see more and more of that. What I think, of course, is really a huge lesson is the spirit of collaboration that we saw. The public-private silos were broken, collaboration across nations at a level that I think was an eye-opener, that it was even possible. I don't know how many of us are familiar with the fact that there are 1.3 million physicians of Indian origin across the globe. And we have an association called GAPIO, which is the Global Association of Physicians of Indian Origin, that aims to bring these 1.3 million physicians on one platform. And we now have members from 53 countries. So when the COVID pandemic started, GAPIO established, in association with the American physicians, the British, the Australian, the Canadian physician societies, a collaborative. And we would meet every few weeks to discuss developments. And we knew in India that we were going to be a few weeks behind in terms of the cases that were being reported in the US and UK. And there was an advantage to us to learn from how treatment was being delivered in these countries, and to prepare better. And this really worked very well. And this collaborative made a huge difference. I think with vaccination, we've seen how interdependent we are and how important collaboration is. And of course, the world recognizes India's contribution in terms of vaccine production and the fact that, Indian-made, Indian manufactured, Indian developed vaccines have become available globally. And I think, again, this is an example of how we need to work together and really make a big difference. And I think the example that India has shown with vaccination, after all, we've now given 927 million vaccines. And on one single day, on 17th September, we administered 25 million vaccines. And that is 5 times more than any other country has done on a single day. The US, the highest in the US of 458 million. So clearly, vaccination has shown how we can mobilize resources and administer vaccines, and what applies to vaccines can apply to other treatment modalities as well. And I think we're going to see with newer platforms that have become available in the last 15, 18 months, vaccines for a number of conditions for which we've been struggling, whether it's the HIV vaccine or the hepatitis C vaccine, or we heard about the malaria vaccine and improvements in the dengue vaccine. So I think the spirit of collaboration with trials held across multiple countries is really going to be the way forward. Coming to investments, I think clearly in India, the pharmaceutical market is about 41 billion. That's likely to get to 130 billion. The biosimilar market is supposed to go up in 4 or 5 times in the next 5 or 6 years. Devices are likely to treble in the next 5 years and hit 50 million. With the government of India allowing foreign direct investment at 100% under the automatic route, I think we're going to see more investments. I think in diagnostics, we are going to see a lot of interest, especially with miniaturized diagnostics. Home health is going to see infusion of capital. And while India is a very young country and 45% of our population, which is a huge 463 million, is less than 20, and at this point in time, the elderly population is at about 8%. But what is going to happen by 2050 is that a number of the elderly is going to go up and become nearly 3 times, more than 300 million. And for the elderly, home healthcare, whether it's home diagnostics, home assessment through wearables, or delivery of medicine or home care is going to be important. And I think we're going to see a lot more traction there. So I think COVID has in many ways demonstrated our resilience, our ability to think out of the box, our ability to work together. And I think in terms of healthcare, the attention that needed to be given to healthcare is now is quite visible, and healthcare is becoming center stage in international fora, in terms of dialogue, in terms of collaboration at the highest level. Going to stop there, and over to you, Joy.
Thank you, Dr. Shibal, and I completely agree that healthcare is going to be in the center stage, and some of the initiatives during this COVID, or rather I should say it was there, but taken a much major leap, like telemedicine, tele-ICU, digital pathology, are going to be the way forward. And it is already showing that even when you are coming back to normalcy, people are continuing to use that, and that is a good sign. Your areas for investment like biosimilars or your diagnostics, the success story of vaccination production, I'm sure that many countries are going to learn from there, and there will be a lot of possibilities of collaborations on this. So thank you very much. So I move on to the next panel. Mr. Satya Pratapa, country head, Sun Pharmaceuticals, Myanmar. So good morning, Mr. Satya Pratapa, and I request you to give your viewpoints on these healthcare needs, especially during this COVID time, and what are the new investment opportunities.
Good morning. And, as we say from Myanmar, Minglawa, and I would confine myself predominantly about Myanmar rather than about the evolving healthcare. Reason for that is Myanmar can be an attractive investment destination for any pharmaceutical healthcare company that is currently looking and working out of India. And I must make a disclaimer here first. The views that I'm expressing here are my personal views, what I have learned because of my interaction with captains of the industry in Myanmar and because of my experience with Myanmar. And they're not necessarily anything to do with my employer, Sun Pharma. That is something that I must say that upfront. Myanmar is making a rapid economic progress over the last 2 decades almost, with about 5% GDP growth year on year. And the GDP now has reached about $70 billion a year. When I look at Myanmar, I remember India of my youth. The one difference being that Myanmar is making leapfrogs both against the technology, about the technology and also about the economic progress. The government is committed for economic liberalization and for welcoming the investment into this country. So as a result of that, the country has changed vastly over the last 10 years of my experience in the country itself. Now, when you're looking at the market in Myanmar, are the opportunities here, this being a developing economy, where probably 70% of the population do not have access to the medication at this point in the time. Both the government priority as well as for market opportunity, preventive medication could be an area where people would want to focus on. This COVID also has highlighted, and I'm also hoping that that will also change the attitude towards adult vaccination. There was a time when vaccination was almost exclusively for children. Whereas the COVID has brought in another facet of the vaccination, that vaccine can save the lives, even adults. And if the same theme continues and if appropriate vaccines are available, other preventable diseases that will have a massive impact and that are having a massive impact on healthcare, it could be typhoid, or it could be hepatitis A, it could be hepatitis B. All these could be open up as a new potential investment opportunities for aspiring entrepreneurs. And when it comes to the Myanmar, one should not look at Myanmar as what it is today, rather than what it can potentially be over the next 10, 15 years of time. Because current market size, I think, is less than $1 billion. So as compared to the other ASEAN peers, at this point in the time, Myanmar would not probably compare well. But what is important is that this is a country of 55 million people. Of this, about 20 million people are below the age of 90. So the country is in a massive demographic dividend, and about 5 million people will enter the workforce in the next few years of the time. And about 40 million people are, of these 55 million people, are in the working age group. That by that I mean below the age, from the age of 20 to the age of 60. This, coupled with liberalizing economic policies, would open the potential of Myanmar in the years to come. And the regulatory environment in Myanmar, the regulatory body is also is managing the regulatory requirement of the country in a pragmatic way. They want to increase the standards, and they would go for what we call ASEAN Common Technical Dossier Standard for new product registration. They would want you to have fixed GMP manufacturing if it is a new product. But for an existing product, they would allow you to with the GMP manufacturing process. So they are managing the requirement for a high quality as well as the availability of the products in this country. And in my experience, there is another difference that has come in this country in the last 10 years is for any pharmaceutical company or a vaccine company to operate in a country, you need to have partners, be it in the distribution partners or be it in the regulatory partners. The country today have many professional organizations working in this field. If you want to start only exporting the product to the Myanmar, there are professionals here who can take your products and market the products. And if you want to only register the products in this country, there are regulatory agencies, and there are ISO 9002 certified distribution organizations like Mega who can actually distribute the product very well into this country. That might not have been the case about 10, 15 years back. So potential entry, which are the areas that one can enter? One can enter into distribution through the distributors. One can enter through their own sales and marketing. There is a possibility, and I'm certain that the government would welcome manufacturing if someone is willing to set it up, though there are challenges in terms of both infrastructure as well as the knowledge workers at this point in the time. So here is where I would sort of conclude. To whom Myanmar is exciting is not for someone who is looking for break even in 3 years or payback in 5 years. Myanmar is for those entrepreneurs who bring value to the market with an intention to stay focused in Myanmar over the next 10 to 20 years. 60 million, 55 million people, and with untapped natural resources, the country has a bright future. Those who come in early and put their goodwill and bring expertise and makes the difference are the ones who will end up reaping the benefits sooner or later. At this point of the time, I think I have said what I wanted to say. Anything else we can address during question and answers. Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Satya Pratapa. And very clearly you have made it that this Myanmar is going to be a land of opportunities, but people should look at it for a longer horizon rather than looking at a short time frame. And I'm sure with the demographic dividend, natural resources, what Myanmar has got, I'm certain that investors, if they enter in this healthcare, pharmaceuticals, they are going to definitely get a good support and success. So thank you for your note. And now I move on to my next panelist, Dr. Sandeep Diwan, Director and HOD ECMO in Fortis Memorial Institute. So over to Dr. Diwan, and please share your views on what are the new opportunities and investment opportunities in this challenging time.
Hello. Thank you, Joy, for the kind introduction, and thank you, CII, for inviting me to deliberate my thoughts on newer opportunities in healthcare. I'm a critical care expert, and my views will be mainly related to role of telemedicine in intensive care unit. Dr. Anupam Sibal has touched that point in his brief deliberation about how EICU can make a difference to the lives of the people. I'll just elaborate on what EICU can do, what are the possible benefits and the clinical outcomes that we have seen, particularly in COVID in last 1.5 years in India and outside countries. Being a critical care physician, the data shows that India needs about 5 lakh ICU admissions in a year. So we have a huge population which is requiring ICU care, and as the average life of the average Indian is going up, we are leading more and more complex lives with more comorbidities, and that is why intensive care units are coming up, mushrooming up in the hinterland of the country in every possible way. The other challenge that we have in India is that, as per the last record, we had about 1,20,000 ICU beds, of which 60% was in private sector and 40% were in the government sector. So that means there's an acute shortage of ICU beds in India. And this was a report before COVID, but COVID was another disease which created the havoc that we all saw in last 2 years. And that is why the number of ICU beds requirement increased tremendously in the last 1.5 years. Various private hospitals, organizations, and the government bodies created a lot of ICUs to cater to this acute demand of COVID patients, which was actually, I would say we actually forgot the non-COVID patients during that 2-year period, in the last 1.5 years. But we have to think that this COVID is over and above the healthcare burden. It is another disease which was added. The other healthcare burden remained there. So, and the last thing was that, as per the data, only 15% of ICUs in India are actually manned and managed by trained critical care physicians. So that means we are not only short of ICU beds, but we are also short of trained critical care physicians to manage these ICU beds. That means 85% of our beds are not at this point of time managed by the adequately trained people. So that is why there is a complete need for newer innovations as far as emergency management is concerned. Now, if you look at a telemedicine platform, patients still have time and they can still choose and elect where they want to get an OPD done from. But if you are in the hinterland of any country, forget India, and at 2 a.m. in the night, the only thing that if an emergency strikes, you would go to the nearest possible hospital because you don't have a choice. And since you don't have a choice, you will go to the nearest ICU, and whatever we do in the first golden hour makes a difference between life and death. So can you imagine, our life is actually dependent on first 2 hours of critical care management, and obviously the competence of the nurses and the doctors who are managing us in that ICU. Now, the realistic scenario in the countries, and we are practicing outside India also, is that in the hinterland, because there are no trained nurses, very few trained doctors, that is why innovations have created, it created way for the innovations. In EICU, what we do is that the critical care specialist, a team of specialists is sitting at a large command center. The command center generally acts as the hub, and all the remote ICUs are connected digitally through a IT network with real-time alerts to the command center. So the team of critical care specialists at the command center keeps on advising the doctors and the nurses at the remote site 24/7. Because ICU is an emergency area and the service can never stop. Therefore, it is very, very critical that the tele-ICU platforms run 24/7. We actually work on a very integrated IT system and system of softwares, so that real-time alerts come from the monitors of the ICUs. See, in this era, 90% of the critical care decisions are taken on the basis of data. So if we have access to the data on a real-time basis, we can actually manage remotely ICUs in as remote areas of the world as possible. To give you an example, at this point of time, we are managing intensive care units in South Pacific Ocean, in Samoa Islands, in Nauru Islands, in Tuvalu Islands, where there's hardly any critical care available. So the benefit of the healthcare technology is that it is completely expandable, it is cheap, cost effective, and with it we can actually give world-class critical care to the remote areas of the world. The second benefit why we open intensive care units is to actually decrease the mortality. So if we look at our COVID network that we created thanks to CII, and also working actively with the government of India, because the last 1.5 years, the government has taken a huge burden of the COVID also. So we managed a network of 669 ICU beds created across 32 districts, managed approximately 22,000 critically ill COVID patients, and out of that only 761 deaths were recorded. If we compare our EICU outcomes with the pre-EICU outcomes, we created a more than 50% reduction in mortality. See, please understand, if you have a heart disease, we go to a cardiologist. If we need an ICU, we need a critical care specialist. So it's not that we are doing something very complex. It's just that we are putting a consultant in a roster for that remote ICU in the night, so that he can advise the doctors and the clinical protocols can be managed. And that is why this 50% outcome improvement in the mortality is in COVID in ICUs was a huge outcome. We also knew that mechanically ventilated patients who go on the ventilators, they have very high mortality in the COVID. But when we started managing these patients through tele-ICU, we actually improved that outcomes also. And the last part, if we understand, in the hinterlands of the country, it takes few hours for a patient to travel all the way from a small city to a major city. It has its cost implications, and more importantly, it's proven in medical literature that ambulances, there are more deaths in the ambulances while transport when the patients are being transported across hospitals. So if we can give the same level of ICU care at the remote areas, Patients would not need to go to higher centers, would not need to come to metro cities. It will be cost-effective care, and they get the treatment at their home city. And that is why we have documented 28% reduction in referrals from smaller cities to larger cities. So if I were to summarize this, as any platform of telemedicine, whether it's teleradiology, telemedicine, tele-ICU is also a great innovation where emergency care and critical care can be provided at the remote site 24/7. And through the same platform, the training of the nurses and the training of the doctors can also be performed. So overall, as a critical care specialist, I feel it's been a great boon in last 1.5 years for particularly COVID patients. But as I told you, we have just published a paper where we have actually done 60 thrombolysis in acute heart attack patients where there is no cardiologist, there was no physician. So it has implications for heart disease, it has implications for kidney problems, it has implications for ICU. So healthcare technology is there to stay, and I hope that more and more platforms like this will come up, and the acceptance which has already grown among the society and among the healthcare sector will grow more and more. With that, I end my deliberation, and thanks, Joy, again for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Diwan. And I think you have shared not only the success story of the EICU, but some of the data and statistics. I'm sure it is going to be mind-boggling to watch. And if we can replicate in multiple countries, multiple cities, multiple districts, it will bring a huge improvement in our health outcomes. I like the part what you mentioned that the referral was brought down by 28% when you created this kind of infrastructure. I think that is the most important need of the hour, because today patients, most probably they don't die in most of the occasions because the care what is given in the ICU is substandard, but probably they lose the initial time and they spend time, the way they get transferred, the complete logistics, it is a huge challenge for them, especially you use the word hinterland, and I'm sure that this is going to make a huge change. Secondly, it is not only the ICU. In fact, when we are waiting and we are watching and we are suspecting the third wave is going to come up in June, July, at that time there was a matter of concern and a word of caution from none other than Dr. Devi Shetty, where he highlighted that in India, when we speak about the beds, we want more number of beds, but we probably don't consider the number of human resources as in form of doctors, nurses, allied health science professionals, what we need to have, and that needs to be strengthened. And you have also very correctly highlighted that, and it was very impressive to note your outcomes wherever you have given treatment and the kind of recoveries have taken place, and congratulations for that, Dr. Diwan. So I move on to the next panelist, Mr. Indranil Sen, the Managing Director of Ranbaxy in Malaysia. So I request Mr. Sen to give his perspective on these healthcare needs and new investment opportunities. Over to Mr. Sen.
Thank you, Mr. Joy. Thank you, Mr. Rajesh, for a nice introduction at the beginning. And of course, thanks a lot to all the panelists so far for providing their perspectives on the healthcare needs and situations in the ASEAN. I would like to make a small presentation so that I can deliberate on the perspectives that I have. I hope it's visible, right?
Yes, it is visible.
Okay, thank you. So basically, my presentation would focus on the perspectives, the requirements, and the current situation, particularly with the situation of COVID, which has persisted in this part of the world for a longer time. And what are those immediate needs and opportunities that the industry has to focus on in ASEAN? Now, if you look at the demographic details of ASEAN and why it makes it one of the most important regions globally, ASEAN has a population of about 655 million, which is 9% of the global population. So that's a very significant number to start with. The GDP growth, which is expected to touch 6% in ASEAN, with some of the major economies like Philippines and Vietnam, which is expected to grow at 8.4 and 8.5% respectively. There has been a trend of declining population growth rate, which has been 2% in 1999 which has reduced to about 1.1% in the last 4 years, because of which there is a sustained decline in the fertility rate leading to the aging population. There are also reported incidents of reduced child mortality, which has led to longer life expectancy. If we look at the average life expectancy, in the 1980s, it used to be about 61 years. And over the period of last 11 years, it has increased to 72.1 years. As a result of all this, there has been an increased burden on the healthcare costs across all the governments in these countries. Now, what are some of the critical challenges which plague the ASEAN region in terms of healthcare? If we look at the average total healthcare expenditure per capita, it is about $544 US dollars, which is 4% of the ASEAN GDP. This compares reasonably well, particularly if you look at some of the other emerging countries in the world, where the healthcare expenditure per capita is much, much lower. Of course, in this also, there'll be a good mix of countries like Singapore, which will have one of the highest per capita incomes, to some of the low per capita incomes in some countries like Myanmar, Laos, and the likes. Also interesting to note is that the proportion of population aged 65 or above, it grew from 5.3% in 2000 to 7.1% in 2019, and is projected to rise to 10.3% by 2030, which means there'll be a significant increase in the elderly or aged population in the ASEAN countries by 2030. Currently, there exists a very high prevalence of smoking, overweight, and obesity, and also there are higher incidences of severe non-communicable diseases. Now, because of all this, the demand for healthcare services, especially the elderly care and the treatment of chronic diseases after the pandemic, is expected to rise. Just to give you some examples of some of the chronic diseases like diabetes, Malaysia, for example, in Malaysia, 16% of the adult population suffers from diabetes, which is 1 in every 5 adults who suffer from diabetes in this country. If we look at some other countries in the region, like Philippines or Vietnam, which are much more populous countries, there 7% of the adult population actually suffers from diabetes. So this is like, it's becoming like an endemic, because this is where the focus is of all the government healthcare system as well as the private healthcare system. And diabetes definitely is one of the diseases which the Indian companies can focus on, because India itself is one of the leading countries where there are incidences of diabetes. It would rank among the top 3 in the world very clearly. And Indian pharma companies have done reasonably well in supporting the healthcare industry in terms of providing quality medicines to treat diabetes. So this could be one area which could be focused on in the ASEAN region. Also, post-COVID, we have seen that there has been a significant increase in the intensive care treatments and respiratory diseases, which are actually on the rise. COVID has also put a severe burden on the public healthcare facilities, and there is an opportunity to collaborate with the private sector. So although some of the ASEAN countries have some form of universal coverage, which is evolving, but post-COVID, people are making a lifestyle choice by opting for private sector insurance, which is growing rapidly. So definitely, it's a lifestyle choice which people are making, and there are increasing number of people who are willing to visit the private healthcare facilities, because of which there's a greater demand for doctors, for support staff, for medicines in particular. And that is where again, where the Indian companies can really focus on and tap the opportunities. What are the opportunities which exist in the healthcare in ASEAN? One of those critical areas would be the R&D and the manufacturing sector. Why it is so interesting? Because the Indian pharmaceutical companies have the latest technical know-how, and they can impart this knowledge to these ASEAN region to ensure that their deliverables are actually bolstered up, or they are up to the mark with the global standards. So collaboration into technology transfer and utilizing country-based clinical research center for clinical trials and formulation development would be one of the key investment areas. In countries like Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, and Malaysia, they have a robust generic manufacturing capacity. However, most of them import their active pharmaceutical ingredients, which is the basic raw material which is required to manufacture pharmaceutical products. And 99% of these active pharmaceutical ingredients are either imported from China or from India. Now, because of the current challenges, the cost of these pharmaceutical ingredients have gone up significantly. There has been challenges in the supply chain, because of which the local manufacturing companies across these countries have struggled quite a bit. Hence, I see there's a very good opportunity to collaborate on setting up of the API manufacturing plants to help these companies optimize manufacturing costs. And who else better than the Indian companies to lend their expertise to make sure that, again, they understand the mechanism of reduction in costs, and thereby making their treatment options more viable. One of the other most important areas are the registration and regulatory related issues, because majority of the ASEAN regulatory guidelines are actually harmonized as per the International Community of Harmonization, which is ICH and EU guidelines. Most of the countries have a mutual acceptance on data sharing and recognition of the current good manufacturing practices, which has been initiated by these member countries in ASEAN, who are actually the members of the Pharmaceutical Inspection Scheme countries. As a result of this common understanding, there is a greater advantage for companies to file common dossiers across the countries for product registration without much additional data. So this would definitely help the companies look at the countries as a single source of entry with their product files to be filed into the regulatory authorities. Now, if we all know that the ASEAN pharmaceutical market is a very robust pharmaceutical market, because as far as pharmaceuticals are concerned, this region would be worth about $25 billion US, and it is expected to grow at a rate of almost 11% in the next 5 years. So definitely, any investment into this sector would be quite encouraging, and the returns would be almost kind of assured for the pharmaceutical companies. Another critical area which has come up very significantly post the COVID is the digital services and the supply chain. Post-COVID, there is opportunity for critical care and teleconsultation, as it has been seen in majority of the countries in ASEAN that patients still have some hesitancy to visit the clinics physically, because they fear that there could be some kind of contamination or the spread of the disease, and because of which critical care and teleconsultation is one of the major focus areas. Hence, investment in healthcare technology solutions would be one of those opportunities where Indian companies can look forward to. There is also a demand for digital health services, which are more accessible, of better quality and lower cost. And many of the Indian companies today are in a position to deliver these services. Stepping in to address the major supply challenges of medicine post-pandemic is one of those areas which also needs to be focused due to the decreased manufacturing capacity, the logistics and distribution challenges, increased purchasing costs, because most of these challenges, particularly these three critical challenges, have been experienced in this region very, very critically in the past few months, and particularly when the second phase of COVID struck. We have seen that there has been acute shortages of medicines purely on account of the capacities getting constrained. There are challenges in logistics, and of course, the purchasing costs going up because the freight charges getting doubled or even at times quadrupled for importing the products. There is a pricing pressure because of this on the public and the private healthcare system. And as procurement by the government is affecting their budgets, particularly in countries where there is a universal coverage. So they are looking for quality generics at an optimum cost. And because of this pressure, also which is on the public healthcare system, the patients are also focusing more on the private healthcare system, because of which the private healthcare systems are also gradually getting challenged in terms of their capacity. So this would be some of the broad opportunities which can be tapped by not only the Indian pharmaceutical companies, but also the associated industry, which is one of the vibrant industries in India. So with this, the mantra for success would be look ASEAN and act ASEAN, because this is the time when it will be very important to focus on this region. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your patience and understanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shen, and I like the ending words, look ASEAN and act ASEAN. So I'm sure the participants and those who are not here, they're going to take this message and going to work on this. And very nice to get some of the data again, that you have 9% of the world's population sitting in Asian countries, and probably some of the encouraging facts, like you mentioned about the life expectancy has gone up, which shows the country is doing well in terms of the health front. At the same time, the challenge is 65 years plus population size is also going up, which is again going to have some sorts of pressure on the demography and all. So I have some questions subsequently on this, and thank you very much for sharing. And I agree with you, there is a tremendous potential which is lying ahead of all of us to get investment done in the Asian and see the success out of that. So I move on to the panelists for the next level of questions what I have. But before that, I want to tell all the participants, those who are attending this, you can post your questions in the question answer tab, and you can put it there. So if we have time, we'll take some of those questions. You can mention if you want to ask this question to anyone specifically, then we can ask that question to that particular panelist. So I move on to the next round of questions, and I'll request panelists to be a little brief, maximum 2-3 minutes kind of answer. So one of the major investment or other business opportunities what we have seen was in medical value travel, medical tourism popularly known as. And in amongst the Asian countries, you have Thailand, Singapore, which are the major destinations, as well as India is also catering a good number of medical tourists who are coming for the medical care and healthcare treatment to India. But this COVID has created a lot of challenges, made a lot of issues that for their travel and this to happen. So I move on to Dr. Sibal to ask that what can be done during this COVID and even immediately post-COVID to get back to this medical value travel, which will be not only the practice in India and your perspective, but that can be also a very good input for countries like Thailand or Singapore. So over to Dr. Sibal.
Thank you, Joy. So medical value travel, of course, as we all realize, is something that took a hit during COVID because of all the restrictions with travel. But having said that, despite that, people did manage to travel. For example, at Apollo Hospital, Delhi, we performed 30 pediatric liver transplants in patients from ASEAN, from Philippines, from Malaysia, from Indonesia. Of course, all these children and their families had to come into quarantine. We had to do a lot of tests, and they also had to weather the storm that we had with the second wave. But of course, the numbers have come down considerably, and I think we hopefully in the last 2-3 months of the year and in the first quarter next year, we should see traction back. Because let's face it, that the value proposition of high quality competitive cost that medical value travel offers when it comes to India is really without competition. But let me just give you one example. In a top institution in the United States, a liver transplant will cost between $350,000 to $400,000, and our patients go home in $30,000. And the kind of experience that we have and the volumes that of patients that we've treated are really comparable to the busiest in the West centers that started transplantation much earlier. This is just one example. Look at proton therapy. There isn't any other proton therapy unit other than the fact that we have one in Chennai. And again, the cost differential is 1/10 of the cost. So the value proposition is very attractive. I think what we need to do is hopefully, the government of India announced tourist visas from October 15th. So that's a positive step. Medical visas have been given, but I think the challenge really has been connectivity, and hopefully flights will resume again. And with the learnings that we have from COVID in terms of virtual consults, we've been managing a lot of these patients virtually. And I think once they go back for follow-ups, we'll be able to manage virtually. So that's going to be a huge benefit. Many physical trips for follow-up will not be needed. And I think that will, of course, be of immense benefit in terms of inconvenience being saved, and of course, the cost and trouble. In terms of some of the ASEAN countries, Singapore and Thailand, of course, and Malaysia have very, very solid policies to encourage medical value travel, to encourage healthcare providers to provide care to patients from overseas. And so, of course, when we add these three countries along with India, Asia becomes, and ASEAN really becomes the key in terms of medical value travel. Competition, of course, is from Turkey, to some extent from Jordan, Germany, the United Kingdom, and of course, in Central America from Mexico and Brazil. So I think ASEAN has a huge opportunity when we combine the best of Eastern and Western medicine. And I think this is an opportunity that we need to tap. No patients from ASEAN need to go to the West. We can manage within our countries, and hopefully patients will start to benefit from what offerings we have in the coming weeks again. Over to you, Joy.
Thank you, Dr. Sibal, and thank you for your things, and congratulations. You have done so many of pediatric liver transplant and other procedures even during this COVID time. So I'm sure that is going to take not only India's medical tourism business forward, but others also will learn from that. I move on to Dr. Diwan, and I heard from you a lot of successes what you have made in this field of emergency ICU, EICU, and you have managed tele ICUs. So the question with this, Asian regions, and also Mr. Sen mentioned about the increasing life expectancy and population size above 65. So in this region, we have aging societies, and there is an increasing need for long-term care of chronic conditions. So the question is, how can we look at investing better into innovative business model? And more than business model, my question will be probably, what are the innovative models you see with the help of right technologies, which can efficiently deliver treatment in a cost-effective manner for this aged population? So over to Dr. Diwan.
Thanks, Joy. When I was going through Mr. Sen's presentation, I could realize that the problems in India and ASEAN are more or less the same as far as the healthcare are concerned. As you rightly pointed out, with the aging population and living with more comorbidities. See, elderly care is something, and chronic care is something which will be required by all. Let's accept the reality at some point of time. Now, as I always told, getting access to a trained physician is very difficult and became extremely difficult in COVID times. So that's why I think all the innovations that we have learned till now, whether it's telemedicine, tele-ICU, getting a home diagnostic, getting home care, like in India, home healthcare has become a huge success. Isn't it? So now patients really don't want to come to hospital for smaller issues, for something like as small as a blood pressure or diabetes, and it has actually changed the diabetes managed completely. If you talk to an endocrinologist, we generally see the sugar levels and we tailor the medication. So that's why the chronic conditions management over a period of years will change completely. People will stop coming to the hospitals for smaller things. They would prefer everything to be received at home, but then it has to be a holistic approach, which includes service, lab tests, diagnostics, follow-ups, and supply chain. So while at this point of time, most of the pharma companies are restricting their supply chains to the hospitals and to the homes. It's mainly done by the home care business models. But I think that is where the whole healthcare will move. And in US, already there are few companies which have done extremely well in managing chronic care conditions at home. So requiring using the telemedicine platforms. The chronic care platforms are completely different from the emergency care platforms. Please. So that's why this is where I think we will move. The whole world will become one. I'm just hoping that we overcome these challenges of the mindset, which is already changed, of using technology. As Mr. Sen was saying, there is a reluctance now among our patients also to come to the hospital. Every time they will call us, sir, is it safe to come? You know, so these are the issues which are going in the mind of the common public. So we have to reach to the people rather than people coming to us.
Thank you, Dr. Diwan. I think what you have told very clearly, that moving from brick and mortar model of hospital to taking healthcare at patient's home. And the model, what you have mentioned, is absolutely like a Western world concept of disease management, where a patient, especially chronic patients, are kept away, a thorough monitoring and supervising them, following up them in a periodic basis can prevent many of the hospitalization or hospital admission process, and that can take away the stress on the overall healthcare ecosystem. So thank you for that input. I have got a question which has come from the audience, and I asked this question to Mr. Sen, and very interesting question, I feel, and I'll be happy to get the answer from Mr. Sen. And the point is that according to various studies, only about 14% of drugs are successful in passing clinical trials. Pharma companies, they spend and pay a good amount of money to develop these and complete the clinical trial process to get the statutory approval. But when there is an expense and ultimately only 14% are passing through, so there is a huge amount of expense which ultimately goes waste. So now there is a role of artificial intelligence to potentially improve the R&D process, from designing and identifying target-based, drug validation. So if that is true, then the question is, how do you think pharma companies in India and the Asian region can rely more on artificial intelligence to improve success rate of new drugs in more affordable drugs by reducing operation cost? So over to Mr. Sen.
Thank you, Mr. Joy, and it's really a very interesting question. My thought process in this would be like, if you look at the history of pharmaceutical industry, till about 15, 20 years ago, most of the research used to be the domain of the multinational companies. So typically they would do their research in the US, in UK, Europe, and some countries like Japan. What has happened over the years because of the advent of generic drugs, and in which India has been one of the pioneers, I would say, the Indian companies has invested a lot in research and development. And as you would all agree that the research setup within India itself, as far as pharmaceuticals are concerned, is up and growing. Because of the leverage we have on the costs, it is very important, and it is very realistic that the Indian companies are able to do research which is much more which reduces the cost. So typically, if you look at the multinational companies based in the US or the UK, the cost of research which they would incur versus the cost of research which the Indian companies would incur would be about 1/10 to that extent. And that is where the Indian generic companies are investing their resources and making sure that the generic supply chain continues, generates revenue, but whatever revenue gets generated, the major lump of it is actually focused into research. Now, what will happen going forward is the Indian companies, the generic, so-called generic companies, would actually be starting to become the proprietary companies. If you look at the top 10 companies in India today, their major emphasis or focus is on research. And as you would agree that the research takes a lot of time, it may take about 10 to 12 years for a molecule to go through all the clinical trials, all the various phases. By the time they come out, it definitely would be one of those important milestones in terms of providing accessible therapies. So artificial intelligence is definitely a thing which is going on, which is parallel. But my bet would be on the generic companies from India. Watch out for them. You will get world-class products, research products at a much, much affordable cost. Because each and every country in the world, whether it's a developed country like the US, the UK, Europe, or Asean countries, somewhere in Africa, each and every government is focusing on cost competition. Because the procurements has to be justified in such a way that they offer the scale. And that is where each and every country, even the US today, I mean, although the innovator or the multinational company is selling their product, but if there is a generic alternative, they are going for that because they are quite confident that the quality of the generics coming out of Indian companies is much, much superior or at par with the innovator product. And that is where Indian companies are focusing on. And mark my words, give another 5 or 6 years, you will see a drastic change as far as access to affordable therapy is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Sen, your words are really encouraging that over a period of time, Indian generics are going to be really applauded by the rest of the world. And the quality, the most important part is the quality of it is very going to be really acceptable and as per the research product. That is a very nice thing to know. So we are almost at the fag end of the session. So I'll ask the last question to Mr. Satya Pratapa. And the question is that in India and Asean, we already have mechanism for cooperation in joint research and development on health, communicable and emerging infectious diseases. So the question to you is, what all you expect to happen further to make it more, stronger, better to deliver our desired goal? So over to Mr. Satya Pratapa. You're muted. You have to unmute yourself.
I must confess that I'm out of the depth here, right, at the question. But allow me to say this. One of the things that what COVID has highlighted is that the healthcare is not just a country-based one, and then we need collaboration across the countries for us to rise to any challenges posed by with regards to the healthcare. So therefore, I would expect the cooperation to become stronger as we go forward. While each nation will try for their own ability on self-reliance, there would be increasing emphasis on the collaboration. And that perhaps is also reflecting in the way the COVID vaccines were developed in a record short time. I hope I'm addressing part of the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And there is another question which has come from the audience. And the question is on that when you have training and exporting of health workers from India is part of the government of India's initiative to link India's labor market with the other countries. So question is that, how we can do that, and do you see an opportunity for India and Asian countries in this area, especially in healthcare sector? So I will prefer to answer this question before I conclude the session, because I closely work on this, healthcare workforce development and the skill development front of it. So in India, with the support of World Bank and with the support of different other agencies, we are working on this. And if you ask this question, is there an opportunity? So I think there is an excellent opportunity platform already being created, and we can work together. We are running short of time, so I'll not deliberate this, but I'm sure you can get connected to the CII, and CII is working on this front, and there is already a lot of work happening in collaboration with different bodies and organizations, and we can definitely help you in this particular endeavor. So I want to take this opportunity to thank each and every panelist, because very importantly, the points which have come up in terms of whether it is collaboration, market opportunities, areas of investment, and what is lying ahead of us, all these have been very beautifully presented by all the panelists. I have got some of the very good insights, and I'm sure, like me, there are others who are attending this program, they have also got it. So with this, I want to thank CII for giving me this opportunity to chair this session in this morning and interact with some of the eminent personalities and professionals from the healthcare field. What we'll be looking for, we have discussed today that what COVID has given opportunity. Probably next year when you have this Indo-Asian Business Summit and Expo, we will not have this in the digital platform, though we want digital to come up significantly in a bigger way, but probably we'd love to see and meet each other and to have a physical event. So till then, stay safe and wish all of you all the very best. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chakravarti, for chairing the session. Thank you all.